Or are they going to be able to tell a story where you are the purest good guy and then you had to defend yourself? We are the Armed Attorneys. I am back today with Armed Attorney Leslie Cross, and we're going to talk a war story from a shared client. This is a very rare self-defense example where not only did he preserve his own life in a situation where I think most people probably would have died, but he did everything right. So stick around if you want to hear about a perfect example of self-defense gone right. And before we get started, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting the like button. And I think I'll just kick us off, Leslie.
Sure.
We have this wonderful client. You know who you are. He has given us his permission to talk through this scenario. We are going to give the facts truly and exactly as they happened with his permission, although we are going to preserve his name and where he is in the state because it's just not a great idea.
No.
You just never know. People retaliate.
100%.
There's no statute of limitations on murder. So even though the case is presumably over for the moment,
you never know what'll happen.
You never know.
Yep.
So it's good not to have names tied up publicly with this. But, sir, you know who you are. Thank you for your permission to talk through your incident because it is a wonderful teaching example for others. So what we have here is a retired law enforcement officer. 0.1 in his favor.
100%. Definitely in his favor.
So highly trained, wonderful gentleman, works now as a freelance photographer for real estate listings and with realtors. Went to a home that needed to be photographed and listed, parked his truck across the street from said home, started taking pictures of the outside of the house. Parked his truck. I don't know, Leslie, how would you describe where the truck was parked?
It was parked. It's a typical residential neighborhood. There's a street down the middle, sidewalks on each side, and he parked his truck across the street from the house that he was photographing. And he said that the reason that he does this is so that he can get up into the back of his truck and take a picture of the home so he has a greater angle on it, kind of can get the whole house. So this is very routine for him. Also being former law enforcement, he's very cognizant of where he parks and how he parks. He knows what the laws are in regards to parking, close to the curb, that sort of thing. He also is just a good person to make sure that he isn't blocking people's driveways or trash cans or mailboxes or anything like that.
Makes sense. So we've got photos from the outside of the house. Our realtor has arrived as well. We're going to proceed on into the home and take some internal photos. And while this is happening, the two of them sort of look out the window and see that there is a gentleman who has pulled up outside of this man's truck, is sort of eyeballing it, finally pulls into the driveway next to where the truck is parked, gets out and starts taking pictures of the truck. I will say this is not the first client I've had where a fatal self-defense shooting has started with taking pictures of someone else's car.
For a parking violation.
So maybe just, I don't know, mind your business.
100%
is probably a good piece of advice there. And so at that point that the two parties see there is someone out there obviously has an issue with the way the truck is parked. We're not trying to cause any waves or make any issues. Leslie, what then happens?
So at that point, our client goes to the front door of the home that he is photographing, and he never goes outside of the door. And there's some pretty long driveway walkways. So he's set back a distance, but he ends up asking the gentleman, hey, is there something wrong with my truck? Do you like my truck? What's going on here? And the gentleman responded, who is the neighbor across the street, whose home our client was parked in front of. He tells our client, oh, well, you're blocking my driveway.
The driveway he had pulled into successfully.
Correct. So he had already pulled his car in. So obviously it wasn't actually blocked. Our client says, hey, man, I wasn't blocking your driveway. I can see you just parked your truck in the driveway. So obviously I wasn't blocking it. I'm almost done here. Let me finish up and I'll be out of your hair.
But what does I guess we'll call him the neighbor, right? The neighbor and the client, right? What does the neighbor see that causes a problem, though?
Right. So our client lawfully has a license to carry, lawfully carries his firearm, but the way that he carries is that he has his pistol in the waistband, but the handle of the firearm pistol is showing. Typically, though, he has a jacket on, and with the jacket, it's completely concealed. Because he was in the home taking photos, and I don't think the air was on in the home because no one's living there currently. It got hot. He took his jacket off. He never alluded to the firearm. He never pointed to it, never talked about it. However, the neighbor did see the gun and said, "Oh, you have a gun." To which our client said, this isn't about my gun. I don't want any problems. Let me finish taking the photos and I'll be out of here.
Right. And, remember, in the state of Texas, that concealed or open holstered firearm, completely legal and lawful in this situation. The fact that it was inside the waistband and the butt of the gun revealed, no problem, as long as you're not touching it, right?
Exactly.
You're not pointing it at someone. You're not, people think they can get around some of the brandishing laws sometimes by being like, I'll use this. We've got none of that here, right?
And it wasn't a holster in the waistband.
Correct.
Yeah.
Completely legal and lawful. You would hope that that's the end of the interaction. And instead, we finish our photos, we're closing up the house, realtor and photographer client are leaving, and what happens next?
Right. So our client and the realtor walk to our client's truck, which he says is typical practice for them. They typically go to his truck. They kind of talk shop a little bit, discuss when the photos will be ready.
Debrief.
Exactly. And at that point, the realtor says, "Oh my gosh, look, there's that guy. He's right there." And at that point, our client looks up and our client is standing on the driver's side of his truck in between the back door and the tire. So he's right there. He looks up and the neighbor is at the end of his tailgate. So presumably about 6.5 feet, 7 feet away. And at that point, the neighbor starts in again with, "You're blocking my driveway. Look, I can show you." And I think it was something where maybe, an inch of the truck was over that little line, to which the realtor is very kind. She jumps in. She says, "I'm blah, blah, blah. This is why we're here." They explain the process and they even tell them, "Look, we're putting our stuff away. We are leaving. We're done.
We're gone.
Exactly.
Sorry for the trouble."
100%. Very polite interaction. Our client stated he never thought that this person was a threat. He never even thought this person had a gun at this point. He said he could tell that this person was probably intoxicated. So he said he kind of had thought, well, maybe if worse comes to worse, I'll have to push him over to give me and the realtor a chance to get in the truck and we can drive away. He thought that that's the worst that would come of this.
Well, what happens?
So they're standing there and they're talking and our client says, "Look, man, we're leaving. I wasn't blocking your driveway, but it doesn't matter because I am leaving." At that point, the neighbor says, "Well," and he from his pocket pulls out a gun, sweeps the realtor who is standing here and points the gun directly at our client. As Emily stated, our client is former law enforcement, so he's trained on pulling a gun and getting a round off very quickly. And
Thank God.
Exactly. His training kicks in. And at this point, he pulls his gun and he's able to get a round off before the neighbor shoots and kills him. Unfortunately for the neighbor, he was fatally wounded. Our client shot one time, realized that the neighbor was no longer a threat, and called 911 at that point.
Yeah. So let's talk about what he did right, because at every turn here, he did something right. So I would say step one, he did not instigate this fight
at all. And he didn't go out to confront the neighbor. He didn't feed into the neighbors arguing. He stayed in that doorway. So he didn't even, make the gap in between the two of them less. Very non-confrontational.
Non-confrontational. Second thing he did beautifully and perfectly, de-escalation, right? And remember that this is something that you're never going to see it in like the black and white statute that you have to de-escalate what ultimately ends in a deadly force encounter. I have never been in front of police officers, prosecutors, or members of a jury who don't want to see the guy who actually killed someone, the one try to be the voice of reason and the one de-escalating. I mean, do you have that experience as well?
100%. I mean, there is stand your ground law in Texas. I understand that. However, just because you can stand your ground doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to de-escalate it.
Avoidance.
Exactly.
Because ultimately, if you do, I mean, he still had to stand his ground. He still had to take advantage of those laws in the state of Texas, but he did it with beautifully clean hands.
Exactly.
Right?
And a clean conscience for himself. I mean, even if you use self-defense, this is still something that you have to live with for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the end of the day, he knows that what he did, he had no other choice. He had tried everything else. His stuff was in his truck. His keys were in his hand. He was trying to get in his truck and leave. And this man simply would not let him and then pointed a gun at him.
So let's talk about, and this is the thing that probably most people would not have, most people would have died, I think.
I think so too.
Because we've got, neighbor has drawn what our client just sees as a black semi-automatic pistol. That pistol is already pointed at client, and client manages somehow to draw, extend his arms fully, and fire one shot before the neighbor can actually shoot him first. The intoxication might have helped with that, I think might have
so.
slowed him down.
Yeah.
But most people cannot do that. I don't believe that I would be able to do that.
I don't know that I could do that either.
I don't have the muscle memory of a trained law enforcement officer.
Neither do I.
And that's ultimately what he fell back on. So I think this is a great point for, go to the range.
Go to the range, train, practice, train how you're carrying your firearm. That's how you should be practicing drawing and getting a round off.
And then I think we've got another thing that's probably going to make people really angry when we say it. But thing he did right, number whatever we're at now, infinity, one shot.
One shot.
Right. No
So
one
much
likes to
easier.
hear that. I know. And there's no rule. There's no rule that doesn't say you can't empty your magazine. How many clients have we had who emptied magazines into people?
A lot.
And it's turned out okay.
It has.
Right?
It has, right.
It's not a hard and fast rule, but if you are in this self-defense scenario and you have the wherewithal like he did to see that after that first shot,
Right.
the threat is effectively neutralized, right? That's wonderful because, oh my gosh, did juries like it?
They do. Obviously his goal wasn't to murder someone. He didn't wake up that day and say, you know what? I'm going to go shoot someone. And it's not overkill, no pun intended. But this is something that if it's possible, obviously if the threat wasn't neutralized at that point,
oh, keep shooting.
100%. Keep shooting until that threat's neutralized. Yeah. But I'm so happy that he was able to stop himself, realize that one shot is all he needed, and it made our jobs much easier in that situation.
It's not going to kill your self-defense claim if you fire multiple rounds. I've had clients do it both ways. I've had cases turn out both ways, right?
Okay.
I've had somebody who fired one shot go to prison for murder. I've had somebody who fired a dozen be a, no build, right? Or never charged. It really does happen both ways. But man, if your brain works that quickly that you can tell yourself that the threat is stopped and you can stop shooting, that is great. And like Leslie said, it just makes your attorney's job that much easier.
It really does.
And then we have, because you can still mess up after the self-defense incident is over. So what did he do right after the shot?
So he immediately called 911. He was fortunate that there was a witness there. The realtor was there and obviously witnessed the whole thing. Her life was put in jeopardy as well. So, he had defensive third parties there too, but he called 911 immediately and he got away from the scene. So he did not go back to the body. He didn't touch the body. He didn't move the body. He didn't do any of that. The only time he got semi-close was that 911 asked him if the person was breathing. He got close enough to see that the person's chest was not moving, and he told 911 that. But, not messing with the scene, getting himself and the other person away to get to safety, those were all really good moves.
This isn't really something he did right, but it's maybe luck that there was, in fact, a witness there who could speak to the police.
Right.
Because he also did exactly the right thing, which was not speak to the police until he had an attorney. And if there wasn't a witness there recounting what happened, he probably would have been arrested.
He probably would have. And we can't fault law enforcement, right? You show up to a scene and there's a deceased individual and the other person is literally holding the gun. What do we expect law enforcement to do? I think as a society, we would expect law enforcement to arrest that person. But he was able to not give a statement until he consulted with us, and we were able to assist him in giving that statement to the police. To be honest, in this situation, because it was such black and white self-defense, had he talked to us that night, I probably would have told him to go ahead and talk to the police.
It's so rare, though,
it's
that
so
this
rare.
happens.
It is so rare.
We were, offline, we were talking about this kind of case. And, between the two of us at this point, because this is what we do, I'd say we'd seen hundreds of self-defense instances where we've talked to people where, we know the facts. And this is maybe the second time ever I've seen a case this perfect.
I agree.
It just doesn't happen this way for most people. And the fact that he did everything right really worked in his favor because he had a little bit of bad luck too.
He did. He did.
So what we had was a neighbor of the neighbor who saw the incident, he says, and implicated our client in basically being a bad actor, in just murder, not self-defense. That can happen. I mean, whether it's malicious or not, witnesses can either be mistaken or they can lie.
Yeah, and this neighbor actually came out and admitted to police that he lied, that this was completely made up. He knew
That was
he
the
didn't
good luck
see
part of it again.
It was. Well, there was some Ring video that corroborated the fact that this neighbor wasn't out there when the shooting occurred. Then ultimately he had to come clean. But again, a lot of the self-defense that we see, it is one-on-one. So you don't have witnesses. You don't have someone else to say, this is what happened. So he was very lucky, and that played out well for him.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think take away from this kind of incident, you need to have the cleanest hands possible. You need to think about what story is your attorney going to tell about your self-defense case? Are they going to say he was a jerk and he, even though someone else was photographing his car, he started MFing the guy and throwing middle fingers and marching up to him and showing guns? Or are they going to be able to tell a story where you are the purest good guy and then you had to defend yourself?
Right.
Will your self-defense incident, if you get into one, be this clean? Probably not.
No, he got very lucky.
But you have to do, and is well-trained too.
Very well-trained, yes.
But you have to do everything in your power to make sure that you are that good guy, because there's a reason he's been no-billed by the grand jury so quickly.
Right. So our client got very lucky in this case, and even the detective said that this made their job a lot easier. In a case like this, if there's a deceased person, a DA's office is always going to take that case to a grand jury just so that they can dot their I's and cross their T's and make sure they can tell the community, we do everything to make sure that this case really was justified and really was self-defense. But because this case was so clean and it was such a clear act of self-defense, I anticipate that the DAs in this case probably went in and told the grand jury, this was justified, you should no-bill this case, versus really giving a grand jury time to deliberate on it.
Or just recommending a true bill, because let a pettit jury sort it out, right?
Exactly.
Well, I hope that you found this conversation instructive. It is something that we felt like we had to talk about. I mean, even before he was no-billed, we said, oh gosh, once this is over, because we knew it would be over pretty quickly, we've got to tell people about this because it just never happens this way. Special thanks to you, sir, for letting us discuss your case. And thank you for watching. If you like this content, please subscribe to the channel. Share this video to fight the anti-2A algorithm, and question and comment for us below. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.